I'm Haley B. Miller, and this is Ohio Politics Explained, a podcast where you give us 15 minutes and we give you all the news you need to sound smart and impress your friends. Welcome to another episode of Ohio Politics Explained. Today, we'll discuss the big news on Cap Square. Ohio is getting a new attorney general. We'll also talk about the state gas tax and update you on a lawsuit over the school voucher program. Back in the studio today is Anthony Shoemaker.
Hi, Haley. How are you?
You know, it's spring, it's sunny, pretty good. Let's start with our main headline. Attorney General Dave Yost announced that he's stepping down to join a Christian legal group called Alliance Defending Freedom. This came as a surprise since he still has 8 months left in his term, but he is also term limited. At one point, Yost was a candidate for governor. Walk us through his journey over the past year.
Yeah, I mean, Dave Yost has been in Ohio politics for a long time. He was a Delaware County prosecutor and state auditor, and then became attorney general after Mike DeWine was attorney general. But Dave Yost was widely thought of as a likely governor candidate. And you could even argue, like, once John Husted, was kind of out of the picture, going over to fill J.D. Vance's Senate seat, that Yost was probably the establishment frontrunner. But when President Trump endorsed Vivek Ramaswamy and the Ohio Republican Party got behind him, that kind of ended Yost's quest for governor. And with all the musical chairs moving around, there really wasn't a place for him to go.
Right. Other than DeWine, he was the only current statewide office holder not running for another job. And we've all kind of been wondering up until last week what he was going to do next, because it didn't seem like he was just going to retire and, go off and start playing golf. So I guess now we know.
Yeah, I mean, there were some rumors going around at one point that maybe, some kind of Trump administration job or something like that once he left office. I don't think anybody had ever really thought about him leaving early.
Yeah, it caught me by surprise. That was definitely not on my bingo card, but I suppose when the job is open, the job is open.
Yeah.
And his resignation meant that Governor Mike DeWine had to pick a replacement for him, and DeWine moved fast. He announced this week that Department of Public Safety Director Andy Wilson will take over the rest of Yost's term starting in June. What do we know about Wilson?
Well, Andy Wilson was a Clark County prosecutor. He's been in Mike DeWine's circle, I think, pretty much since DeWine's been the governor. And he played key roles in the Wagner murder trial and was there for the East Palestine crash. He's been around for a long time and leading the public safety department. It also kind of prevents DeWine from having to move all those deck chairs around. Like, there was a lot of talk about, could you move Faber in early or something like that? And DeWine decided not to go that route.
Yeah. As a reminder, Auditor Keith Faber is the GOP nominee for Attorney General and is going to be facing Democrat John Coolwitz in November. DeWine said he certainly thought about appointing Faber, but then that would have created a vacancy in the auditor's seat. And then do you appoint Frank LaRose, the current Secretary of State, who is running for state auditor, to that position? And then what do you do from there? DeWine said that he just didn't think it was right to mess with all of that with the election, coming up in 6 months or so.
Yeah, I think, making people incumbents, half a year before, or not even half a year before election might rub some people the wrong way. The last time we had a situation where an attorney general stepped down early was in 2008 when Democrat Mark Dan stepped down. And Governor Strickland placed Nancy Rogers in temporarily until there was a special election. And then Richard Cordray became the AG. But that then opened up the state treasurer seat, and Governor Strickland appointed Kevin Boyce. So it's kind of an example of how those dominoes happen when you move one to another.
Right. And I'm sure some Republican governors would have taken advantage of this opportunity to move the chess pieces ahead of the election. But we all know DeWine's a very pragmatic guy. He is a Republican, but he's going to do what he thinks is right and practical and not necessarily what is best for the party, maybe. Our next topic is private school vouchers. An appeals court panel heard arguments this week on whether Ohio's private education system is unconstitutional. The state spends $1 billion on the program, known as EdChoice, and public schools say that comes at their expense. School districts filed this lawsuit back in 2022, so it's been a pretty drawn-out fight.
Yeah, and the 10th District Court of Appeals heard the arguments this week. This is going to go to the state Supreme Court. I mean, the 10th District Court of Appeals is 3 Democrats on that, so it's probably not favorable for the supporters of the voucher system. But when they get to a 6-1 Supreme Court, they probably think they stand a much better chance there.
Yeah, public school funding in Ohio has been a fight probably since Ohio became a state, but certainly in recent years, as the school voucher program has expanded, public schools more and more are arguing that the state cares more about private schools versus the public schools that they are constitutionally obligated to fund. And it's worth noting that at one point, the voucher program was primarily intended for low-income students to help them get out of low-performing schools or districts, but it's really ballooned in recent years, and now pretty much any family can use the program to send their kids to private school if they want.
Yeah, I mean, one of the arguments is kind of that the voucher system has created a second system of schools in Ohio. It's, many of these private schools were around before the voucher program, but, they're benefiting greatly from it. And it's hard for the public schools, they're losing out on a lot of money because people are choosing to use that voucher and take their kids to private school. But it's interesting. One of the arguments that the lawyers are making is that the plaintiffs are the originalists because the state constitution calls for the state to provide one public school system.
Yeah, definitely an intricate debate. And as you noted, we're not hearing the last of it anytime soon. This is almost certainly going to go before the Ohio Supreme Court.
Absolutely.
We'll wrap up today with the gas tax. 2 House Republicans introduced a plan this week to temporarily slash Ohio's gas tax. The tax is currently 38.5 cents a gallon, and the bill would cut that in half for 3 months. This is, of course, a response to high gas prices we're seeing because of the war in Iran. But despite that, messing with the gas tax is not a universally popular idea.
Yeah, I mean, Governor DeWine is not really supportive of, definitely wasn't supportive of suspending the gas tax because, I mean, we were talking about dominoes earlier. I mean, getting rid of the gas tax or even cutting it in half causes a lot of dominoes because, so many road projects and highway funding is dependent on those taxes. And when you start messing with it, how do you pay for those projects?
Yeah, I will be interested to see if this bill goes anywhere. I talked to Representative Ty Matthews a few weeks ago. He's one of the sponsors of this and kind of initiated this. He initially talked about suspending the tax altogether. The bill now instead cuts it in half. So I'm guessing he realized there probably would not be widespread support for a complete gas tax holiday. I'm not sure if trimming it a little will be any more popular with folks. I talked to some other lawmakers about this, and they said, what's happening with gas prices with Iran is so fluid. The legislature is not the fastest moving bunch in the world. And so by the time this would get through the legislative process, would gas prices still be high? Yeah,
they could be down by then. I think in your earlier coverage, you talked about him trying to attach an emergency clause to this, which, adds other stress to it. And, if by the time it gets through the legislature, if gas prices are down, it kind of defeats the point. But I mean, I guess they could also be higher. Yeah, never know. And one more thing before you go. The Ohio House and Senate are back in session today after their spring break. We recorded this episode early this week and got ahead of them. So be sure to check our websites for any stories that come out of the State House later.